We're looking at Sal's 1962 Chevy pickup, and like a lot of trucks in that era, it's got its share of rust. Today I'm at Brothers Tech Center, just like I am every single week, to show you how to get your truck back on the road. I'm going to show you how to assess the rust, all your options in your patch panel so you know which one you're going to need for your truck. We'll cut this all out and put it all back in to give you the confidence to be able to do it yourself at home. Stay tuned. So this is obvious rust repair right here that's needed, but the rest of it, sometimes you won't be able to tell. It'll have an uneven surface, but it'll still be strong. You don't necessarily have to cut it out. So what I'll do is I'll get a punch or something and I'll just see if it's strong enough or if I'm actually poking through. So I can see I've got some rust up here in the corner. My outer definitely has to be done. My inner, it's a bit questionable here and here. I'm going to go ahead and climb underneath and see what we got going on. Okay, so the inside's looking pretty good. It doesn't look like we're going to need a major amount of rust repair on this. So let's take a look at all of the options we've got in our patch panels. Now, I've already done the patch panel repair on the left side, and when I did, it had a lot of rust, and I needed this patch panel right here. This is a really high quality patch panel. When I installed this, all of these bolt holes, they just lined right up. I was able to cut everything out, put this in, and everything fit just perfect like. Now let's say on this one here, for instance, I really don't need that much, and I don't need to spend that kind of money on that big patch panel. This one here, this is just kind of a loosely stamped patch panel, and I can just use portions of this, and it's a lot less expensive. This way we give you an option and you don't have to spend a lot of money just to get a little piece. So this is going to be my option if I just need a small section, and if it's a big section, then I'm going to use my more precisely stamped out piece right there. Now on your inner rocker here, you've got a couple of different things going on. Now this is the brace that goes up into here. This is good. I don't have to mess with it. I just want to show you that it is available because it does rust out on quite a regular basis, and a lot of times I do have to do that repair. Now here on the inner rocker, okay, you got a couple of different choices. Now this right here is really inexpensive, and if I just need to do a short section, say from here to here, this is what I'm going to be getting. But if I've got more rust that I'm contending with, and or it's going up to my floor, the inside down in here is rusted out bad, then I'm going to want to go with this guy right here. And the nice thing about this is that it bolts up to the original locations on this support right here, and it does the same thing on the back. So lining this up is a little bit easier than some of the other patch panels in the past. This right here, of course, is your outer rocker patch panel. And then we've got them for the cab corners also. So when you're ordering, just see how much rust you got going on. And then just order the parts that are according. Make sure that you get any peripheral things at the same time. You're going to obviously need new door rubber, things like that. So think the whole project through, not just this one little section. Now, a couple of words on what not to do. Don't just start cutting into stuff and then decide what patch panel you're going to get. Don't cut up this side and that side and all that kind of stuff. You just start with one section, you get all your patch panels, you fix that one section first. After it's secure, then you can move on. So next we're going to go ahead and we're going to see how much of this is good or not. We're going to go ahead and make some measurements so that we got this going right back in the same place it came out of. Then we'll see what kind of rust we've got underneath this. So now I want to assess what kind of damage may or may not have happened before and how well the patch panel lines up now. So normally I'll have my front fender, I'll see how this is lining up here, I'll see if there's any accidents, maybe the pillar got moved back, maybe the cab corner got moved back. I want to check my gap right here and I want to see it's nice and even all the way across. I want to make sure that my door is in its correct spot. If this was shifted down or something, or shifted like this, then my line's not going to be even on the bottom. When I put my new patch panel, I might be inclined to do it off. I'll take a look at different things like this where the cab corner and the rocker panel don't match up correctly from the factory, so I can fix all of those things at the same time. Now let's say for instance you did have some relatively decent damage to the back or the front. You're going to want to try to get things lined up as well as possible before you cut stuff off so that you can get your measurements in there. Another thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to make marks here and there so that we know where it went. So what we can do is we can mark right here on the cab corner, just following this edge right out here. Now we may or may not be keeping that line because of this right here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take a tape measure and we're going to go up about 12 inches right here. And I'll do the same thing in the front. I'll double check that measurement once I get my door off, but now that I know that the panels here lined up pretty good, I can take my door off. Now when you cut and when you weld, if any of the sparks end up on your glass, they're going to burn right in. You're not going to get them out. Make sure it's covered up on the outside and on the inside, front and back. I'm going to double check my measurement now that my door's off here. You can see I'm looking good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the mass of the rocker panel. Now sometimes what guys will do is they'll just hit all the spot welds and then they'll try to pry it off, but I find that makes it a little more difficult, and sometimes you'll do damage to the B pillar or the A pillar or your inner rocker underneath. So when I cut this out, I have to be wary of my inner rocker panel. It comes down over a little bit and underneath this. So I need to make sure that I'm about an inch away from this edge here so I don't cut my inner rocker panel. And when I'm cutting, I'm not going to take my wheel and I'm not going to bury it all the way down into my metal, because if I do, when I'm cutting this out, I might do damage to something underneath. So I'm only burying this down the thickness of the metal, and that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out on the edges here. I'll usually cut right about here somewhere. And on the bottom, you can get pretty close to this edge right here down on the bottom. Over here, I'll probably cut something like this. And then when I get my mass off, then I can go ahead and do my spot welds and gingerly take off any of the remaining metal without having to worry about doing any damage underneath. So let me cut this off and we'll see what we got underneath. All right, I should have mentioned this before, but when you're cutting this out, you cut the bottom off first when the floor's all nice and clean. If you cut off all this other stuff and then you climb up underneath, you're going to have to climb up with the dirt. Now that I've got this all ready to come off, it'll just go like this. You can see there's a ton of dirt in there. And you can see it was definitely needed, but the inner rocker's looking pretty good. Our B pillar's looking pretty good. And at first glance here, the A pillar's looking pretty good. Now I can go ahead and gently take off the rest of this. And you can see that some of these pieces, they'll just come off already because the spot welds are already cut. And that's one of the reasons I do this. I hate to drill through spot welds that were already popped off anyway. So now I'll go ahead and get the rest of these remnants off. Let me show you how I do that. Now, technically speaking, this is the correct way to take out your spot welds. This is a spot weld cutter. You'll notice right here there's kind of a pin on the top of that, and that's to keep this centered when you're trying to cut out the spot weld. Technically speaking, what's supposed to happen is you'll just set that right in there like that, and then that center pin will stay right in its hole. But what happens a lot of times is it walks around on you. So what I like to do is take a smaller drill bit, get me a little bit of a pilot hole started. Now that pin in the center can be a little bit more stable, and I don't have to worry about the thing walking around on me. When I'm cutting through on this, I'm going to do a nice slow speed. I'm not trying to jam through real quick. I only want to go through the first piece of metal. I don't want to go through second and third pieces of metal. I want to make sure that my blades are staying a long time and I'm not wasting any time doing any extra work I don't need to. So a lot of times what happens is that when you're cutting through, when you hit the second piece of metal, there'll be like a little puff of rust and you'll know you're there. Now, if you don't have a spot weld cutter, then you can just use a simple old 3/8 drill bit and maybe a little bit larger and drill them out. This is a little bit more time consuming and such, and you have a little bit more problem with punching all the way through. You don't have a 3/8 drill bit, well then just get a cutting wheel and just simply cut into it enough at different angles, and then it'll be weak enough and it'll pop off. So I'm going to go ahead and take out all these spot welds, then I'll be able to just gently take away the rest of my metal. I'll clean this up a little bit and we'll see what kind of rust I may or may not want to do further going. And sometimes your spot welds are going to be hard to find, so you just go ahead and lightly sand it down, and then you'll see these indentations right here are your spot welds, and it'll be a lot easier to find. So with my spot welds cut out, I can just use a screwdriver and just gently pry things back. I'm not going to get very aggressive with anything. I'll use a combination of my screwdriver, miscellaneous pliers to help get things off. Here in the corners, I'll go ahead and cut little pieces like that so it makes it easier. Just take your time and you'll be fine. Now, of course, if this piece right here is bad, you don't have to bother taking that off. You can just move on to the next section here. But this here, I think I'm going to save some or most of it. We'll find out in just a bit. So I have my pieces off, and I can see that my inner is really not that bad. I know I've got a couple of small sections here in the middle that I'll have to repair. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do down in here. Now, technically speaking, I could just do some small patch panels in here and be done with it. But I'm going to go ahead and cut into this section right here and show you how to do this corner, because more than likely you're going to need to do it too. In order to do this corner, we're going to take the 3 bolts off right here that's holding onto this lower fender bolt bracket. And we're going to take these bolts out too. Now you'll see that they're sticking out a little bit from this plate that's acting as a nut. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cut the ends of these off. There's no sense in trying to drag all that rust and dirt through the hole. When we're cutting it, we're heating it up, and hopefully that'll kind of break off some of the rust too and make it a little bit easier to get these guys out. So let's get this set up a little bit further, and then I'll show you what comes next. I'm going to cut the bottom of my A-pillar off right here. A couple of different things about when you're doing that. I really don't want to be anywhere near my lower hinge bolt because this is a caged nut, if you will. And if I cut up into here, it just creates more problems. So hopefully you don't have any rust up here. Now, I prefer to cut it below this line right here because that's where the outside rocker panel is. If I cut it down here, then I can do all my welds and everything like that. Nobody sees them. I don't have to worry about grinding them down, blah, blah, blah. Another thing I don't want to do is I don't want to just slice through everything, the inside and the outside all at the same time. This is just kind of more of an exploratory kind of thing. I just see how much rust is behind, where exactly I want to cut, different things like that. If I was to cut everything off at the same spot, it makes it tougher to line up my inside and my outside. So if I cut off my outside, say lower down here like this, then I can still use what's left of my pillar here as to line things up with. So let me cut this off a little bit and see what I got going on underneath. So on our lower A-pillar here, you can see there's quite a bit of dirt down at the bottom. You can see that there's a big rust hole here. Now on this piece right here, this is basically just a nut, but it's a nice big flat piece that really helps hold all this together. So I like to take and cut this old metal off of this plate right here and reuse it. And what we're looking at doing in here is this is the inside of the kick panel right here. So right here, this is this piece. So I'll cut this piece off on the inside too, and this is going to be our piece right in here. So now what I'll do is I will kind of take a look on side and see exactly where I'm going to cut the patch panel for this piece, and I'll kind of clean this up a little bit and see exactly what I want to do before I make my next step. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why I cut it where I cut it. Now the inside patch panel here, I'm going to cut it up at about right here. I don't want to have this pillar and this inside cut at the same spot, because if you do that, then this kind of acts like a hinge. It'll be harder to line things up. But if I cut it like this, now I've got this pillar coming down further, and when I put this inside, that'll help me line this guy up. And then that I have the rest of the remnants down here, it'll help me line this guy up. So don't just hack everything off in one spot. And another thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cut it above the floor right here, because I want to take this and I want to be able to slide it up in there like that. So I think what I'm going to do on this one, even though I could get away with just doing a section there, this really doesn't look that great. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this whole entire section back to the B pillar, and then I can go ahead and just simply bolt this up to the original holes. That'll help line everything up. So now I'll go ahead and cut all this out. When I do, I'll be able to get inside this pillar or the support down at the bottom too, and I'll be able to clean it out really good and paint it, something I wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't take it this far. All right, now my back B pillar piece right here, this is actually good. I didn't have to cut this off. The reason I did is because now this will give me exposure back here, and then when I put on this patch panel, I'll be able to use those holes right there to line this up. I can go ahead and I can continue using the rest of this metal if I've got rust back there, or I can just go ahead and cut it off right here. But if I do it this way, I can use that to line up, and it'll help me a little bit. So I've cut my patch panel right here. I'll be able to use my lines right here. And what I'm going to be doing is just taking this guy and sliding it right up on here and fitting it right on top of the old metal. And then I'll be able to see where to cut this. Now up here, in order to get this on here, I'll have to cut out the rust that's right up in this corner right here. So I'm just going to measure this. It's about, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches. I'll go into here. I'm not going to cut out the entire amount. You always want to leave a little bit of metal over, because you can always cut more off, but it's tougher to add more metal on. So let me cut that out, and then I can do some trial fits and get this fitting in here nice. Now I'll take each one of these patch panels and put it in there 5, 10, 15, 20 times, whatever I got to do to get it in the right spot. So this right here, I can see it's not tucking in all the way. I'm going to have to notch it a little bit more right here. Sometimes the angles of this right here might be off, so it'll take you some time, but just expect it and just take your time. My patch panel is fitting up here nice, but it's not going to fit on all the way until I take the old sheet metal out from underneath, because it's keeping me from going all the way in. I'm going to take a magic marker and I'll mark this right here on this side. And then I'm not going to be cutting out the mass of the metal though. I'm simply going to be cutting off the edge right here. So I'll just cut right here like that. Then I'll be able to get my patch panel far enough in, and I'll be able to get it lined up a little bit better. I'll cut off all of this right here. I'll clean up my support down here, and then we'll get this protected from future rust. I'll show you how to do that. Now the reason I left this amount of metal over is because I want to have enough metal to set this on and give me support. If it wasn't there, then it'd be a little bit more floppy and harder to line up. I went ahead and I cleaned out my supports right here as best I can. You don't have to necessarily use this, but you definitely want to clean out the rust as much as possible. There's several different products that you can spray on there that kills the rust or nullifies it. And then I like to shoot a top coat on that also, just to keep rust at bay. With all this set up, now I can set this in here and I can continue my lineup and making sure that everything's looking nice. When I get everybody looking nice, I'll go ahead and I will bolt up these holes right here. Now these actually use a 3/8 bolt, but it's a 7/16 hole. So to help line this up, I'll actually use a 7/16 bolt because it'll really fill in the hole really well, and it won't give me any leeway. So I'll make sure that I'm in the right spot for sure. So I'll get this bolted up in the front, I'll get it bolted up in the back, and then I'll double check things and see if I want to start cutting some more. Test fitted this several times. It's been on and off a bunch of times. I've gone ahead and I've finalized everything. This is bolted up. I'm looking good. One of the things I can notice right here is that this is lining up my old sheet metal with my new sheet metal. I can see that up here in my corner this is lining up really nice. All of these bolts are lining up really good right here. So now I'm confident enough to start cutting this out. When I'm cutting it out, I'm using this patch panel here as my template, and I'm just going right along the edge. Now what's going to happen is that there's still this metal behind it, okay? So you're still not going to be able to get all the way over. We'll cut this out, we'll get the old metal out of the way, and then it'll allow the patch panel to move into where the old metal was, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim it some more. Now the reason we need to do that is because when we're doing a weld, we don't want to take our metal and just butt it straight up against each other. You might think that that's the way to do it, but the problem with that is that when you're welding, if the weld doesn't go all the way through the metal and then you grind the top of the weld off, that might give you a bad weld. So we're going to need a little bit of a gap there for the weld to actually be in between, so that when you sand that off, there's still a weld in there. Another reason that we need to do that is because we're going to be using these right here. These are what's known as a patch panel clamp. So we're going to use a lot of these along the line to keep all of this straight when we're going to be doing our welding. And how it basically works is we loosen it up, we'll set it down, and it'll go underneath the metal. We'll take this little piece right here, it'll go up underneath, and you can see how it has that gap right there. Then we'll simply tighten it up, and then that'll keep my patch panel exactly where I need it all the way down the line when I'm welding everything up. So I'm going to cut this out, I'm going to trim it up a few times, and then I'll go ahead and get my patch panel clamps in there, and we'll start doing some welding maybe, huh? I unbolted this patch panel, I cut out the remnants of metal, I went ahead and cleaned up my supports on the bottom and painted them a little bit more. I went ahead and I ground off not only on the top but on the bottom too, where I'm going to be doing the welding, not only on the cab but on our patch panel right here. So now I can go ahead and slide this in here, which I'm hoping is my last time. Everything's looking good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bolt these back up, and then I'll double check things, and I'll more than likely need to trim here. Then I can go ahead and start my patch panel clamps. So I'm getting ready to weld this, but before I do, I want to double check and make sure that my rocker panel is going to fit properly when it's in this spot right here. So I'll just place it up here. I'll make sure that it's flat on this and my bottom down here is correct. I'll go ahead and I'll do my measurements. I'll make sure I got my 12 inches front and back. And after I'm sure that this is going to be in the right spot, then I can go ahead and finish this off. Now, let's say for instance this wasn't an accident and my holes don't necessarily line up, or my supports don't necessarily line up. Honestly, I don't care. It's nice if all this lines up, but it's not as nice as having all the exterior line up. So if there's any problems with the support or anything like that, I can deal with that or replace them or whatever. If it's a little bit off, nobody's really going to climb up underneath and see. But on the outside, that's where it's going to count. So I have to make sure that my supports didn't move up or down or in or out or anything like that. And anything ugly I can have on the inside, it's just the outside. I want to make sure it's pretty. Now, what you want to remember about welding is that heat is your nemesis. If I just get this and just weld it on up, it's going to warp and create all kinds of problems. So all I'm going to do is just get one little tack weld. Then I'll go ahead and move over and little tack weld, tack weld, tack weld, tack weld. Then I'll come back and I'll go in between each of those tack welds. Once I have enough tack welds to where this is firm, I can take out my patch panel clamps right here. Now, when you're doing that, you might notice that something's getting off. As soon as you notice that, stop. Get your hammer and your dolly and get everything lined up. If you just keep on welding, think you're going to come back and fix it later, no. Once you weld it in, it's just a bear to do. Also, don't just do all your welding and then do all your grinding. Again, the heat and everything like that. So you're just going to get a reasonable amount of welds. Then you're going to go ahead and you're going to sand those down a little bit. When you sand them down, it won't be as much heat and it's going to clean up the welds in spaces in between and give you a better, cleaner weld. Then when you get down for your final sanding, you've already got most of it done and you can just finish it up. So another thing I'll do is I'll maybe get like a little screwdriver like this. If my panel here is not quite lining up, I can take something like this, get it lined up nice and even, and then I can go ahead and get my tack weld in there. So just take your time with this, keep your heat down, and you'll be just fine. So let's take a look at how our welding's going. Now, once you get a bunch of little tack welds built up, you'll get a gap of about 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch between each one. When you get that, then you can just hit it with a couple of zot, zot, fill up that gap there. But make sure everything's good and firm first, then fill in your gaps. When you get to something like this right here, you want your lines to really match up well. So what you do is you get both sides of the aisle, as it were, nice and firm. Then you can hammer these and keep them in place and then finish off your welding here. I'm just about done with this. So what I'm going to do next is I'll get my rocker panel, I'll trial fit it up here, I'll double check my measurements. I'm even going to get the door and bolt it on and double check. This right here, honestly, you could do this wrong. You could get it in the wrong spot, but this rocker panel here, you cannot. So we're going to double check everything before we finish off any of the welding right here, because this right here actually hasn't been welded. I can still get a little bit of movement out of this when I unbolt these right here. So I'm going to double check all that, make sure I'm totally squared off, then we'll finish up. Okay, so I got to double check this guy before I finish everything underneath. I've got a little tack weld here holding this panel on in the front, and I've got a little tack weld here in the back holding it on. When you're doing tack welds like this, make sure that you put them in a place that you're going to be able to take them back off again, because you're going to need to take this off. So now that that's on there, I can shut my door. I can see that my line here is looking really nice, and then I'm even here on the edges and all. Now I know I'm good. I'm going to take this back off. I'm going to take the rocker back off, and I'll finish everything underneath. One thing I keep forgetting to mention is cab mounts. Now let's say, for instance, these cab mounts did not wear evenly. There was a big guy sitting on the right side all the time and it smashed down. If those cab mounts aren't nice and even, when you're doing this kind of repair, it can get things off. So make sure that the cab is nice and stable and all of the cab mounts are worn down evenly, or put new cab mounts on there before you do all of this. Now that I've got it this far, I can go ahead and take this piece that I cut off previously. I can go ahead and weld it back on. I'll take this piece right here and I'll trial fit it in there. And I don't need this large of a piece, so I will trim it down. I'll put it back in. I'll trim it down. I'll put it back in, and I'll do that 4, 5, 6, 7 times before it's fitting in there perfect. Then I'll do the same thing with this guy right here. Now when we took this old one off, we saved the piece right here. And this is the same thing that's going here on the back. And I just like to use these things because they're just nice and solid and give you a really good brace to put everything up. So I'm going to trowel fit and trim a bunch of times and get everything all set up, and I'll be back in just a minute. So it is cut, trim, 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 trim. It'll take you a little bit of time, but just take it, because this is where the brass tacks meets the road. If you don't get this right, you're not going to be able to shut your door right, your rubber's not going to fit on right, etc., etc. So just take your time. Now when I'm working on these and I'm grinding down, this right here, this is a hard wheel, okay? And this is good for getting in little tight nooks and crannies like this. The flap wheel right here, this is just individual little sandpapers like this, folded down, and this is a little bit nicer and a little bit quicker on all the larger exposed areas you can get to. It keeps your heat down and it sands it really nice. After you're going to get that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to paint everything, because we don't want to do this rush repair twice. And I'm going to go ahead and paint this right here. I'll paint the inside of the rocker panel also. It does come with this coating. This coating is very good. It does last a pretty long time, but it's not going to last as long as paint. So paint everything before you put it back together. You can see everything here is looking really nice. We've got our original bracket right here that bolted right in. Now sometimes I'll have to enlarge holes and things like that. You get idiosyncrasies from year to year, truck to truck, miscellaneous accidents. It's not going to fall on. You're going to need to massage it a little bit. But you can see by using my original brackets right here, this is helping me keep all this perfectly in position where it was originally, and back here too. So all I got to do now is just finish off my welds and we'll be ready to go. One last quick little thing though. Let's say for instance we're welding this up and this is fitting nice and flush and this is fitting nice and flush, but this right here isn't, and it's flopping around on you. Get this nice and solid, get this nice and solid, and then all your loose areas that you can't get to loosen up, they'll be firmed up. You'll be able to tap them in place and then finish them off. Now everything's ready to go. It's all painted. I'm going to put it back together, and what I'm going to be doing is what's called as a rosette weld. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to drill through the first piece of metal. I'm going to drill into the second piece of metal. Then I'll go ahead and grind this off a little bit, and I'll do a weld on there, kind of in a circular motion, and it'll look like it's almost a spot weld from the factory. I'll give you a better look at that in just a little bit. But when you're drilling these out, there's a few holes that are tough to get to. So for instance, right here in the front, so I'll go ahead and I'll drill some holes right here, and then I like to drill these holes here when I've got this off. Climbing underneath and drilling is a bit of a drag, so I'll simply drill these where it's easier. You can use a 1/4 inch or a 3/8 inch drill bit. After you drill your holes, you just simply set this right up here, mark wherever the holes are, and we'll clean that metal off again, because of course you need clean metal in order to be able to get a good weld. Another thing I want to point out here is that this right here, you see this little notch? And there's a little notch right here. That's so if any moisture gets into the rocker panel, it can escape. If it can't escape, it stays in there and it rusts faster. I like to get one spot weld, or rosette weld in case, on either side of those, so that they're nice and strong in those areas. So I'll go ahead and get this set up. We'll get it on there. We'll double check everything one last time. We'll start some welding. Alright, so before I do my weld, I'm going to check one last time. I'm making sure I got my 12 inches here and here. I got my mark down here that I've seen, and it's matching up, so I can go ahead and weld this. I've drilled through the first piece of metal and partially into the second piece of metal. If you drill all the way through, it's not that big of a deal. You're just going to be welding it up anyway. Now, when I'm welding this up, I'm going to start in the center of the drill on the piece of metal that's on the bottom. I kind of want to get a weld started on that first, then I'll go ahead and just kind of do a round thing to finish it off. So a little something like this. This truck has not been in any accidents and everything's lining up really nice, but I'm going to show you a few things to look out for to make sure yours is lining up really nice too. So the first thing I like to look for is that this inner piece here and my outer rocker, this gap right here, it needs to be about 3/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, but about 3/8 of an inch. The rubber that's going to go on the door has to go in there, and you're going to hide electrical wires in there too. If you've got too much of a gap, you're not going to be able to shut your door. If it's going in too far, then you're going to have an air gap down here and it's going to make noise. Down here on the bottom, you're going to want to make sure that this line right here and the line of the inner piece, they're all matching up nice and straight all the way. We don't want to have it going at an angle. We don't want too much of a gap. It should be pretty close there, and it should be all nice and even. So all of that's going on with this. We're looking really good. On my corners right here, a lot of times you'll need to kind of like mold these into the nooks and crannies, as it were. So what we'll do on that is right here, this is nice and flush and really lining up well. I simply took a channel lock right here and I was able to just clamp that right there, and it keeps it in the right spot. After I get this welded here, I'm going to mold this edge over here so it's really nice and flush. But I got to have this nice and secure so that I can do that. When I'm doing that, I'm not going to take a hammer and go like this because I'll hit the peripheral. So I'll take something like this and I'll hammer on hammer. And then I don't have to worry about doing any additional damage. I can get this all nice close. I'll drill me some holes here. I'll get that welded up. Of course, we'll have the same thing going on right here. So we're just about done. Give me one more minute. Even though I've got this welded right here and it's solid right there, I've still got a little gap going on right here. And if I just take this and try to hammer it in, it'll just go in and it'll just pop back out again. So what you do for that is you just get a little bit of a tack weld on here to solidify it, then you'll be able to hammer it in. So I'm not going to weld it all the way. Just that tack weld made it solid enough. Now I can finish off the weld. Everything's looking really good. Got a little paint on my spot welds, make sure things don't rust, and we are all done. Now this took me about 8 hours to do. It'll probably take you about the same or more. Just take your time, you're gonna be fine. Now make sure that you check us out on Instagram and Facebook, and when you're on YouTube, subscribe, because this truck needs more work. I gotta do a cab corner, I'm gonna replace the whole roof. You're definitely gonna wanna see that, and if you don't subscribe, you might miss it, man. So we'll see you next week.